She walked in wearing my dress. Not just any dress. My dress. The one I had picked weeks ago after hours of fittings, standing in front of a mirror under harsh lights, debating whether the neckline was too daring for my age or whether the color made me look washed out. I had doubted, hesitated, and finally chosen it because it felt like me, soft but strong. Timeless. I had told no one. Not even her. What happens when your own sister turns your proudest moment into her stage? Stay with me because this revenge story is one you won't forget. Yet here she was, my sister, walking into the hall as though she were me, silk shimmering under the chandeliers, the exact same shade of deep blue clinging to her body. The chatter in the room faltered. Heads turned. And for a moment I felt the world tilt off its axis. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I simply took a slow breath, sipped my water, and straightened my back. Calm. That was my weapon. Calm when she expected outrage. Calm when she wanted me to falter. She'd stolen my dress, but she hadn't stolen my composure. And she never would. What she didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I had something she couldn't touch. A secret advantage tucked safely away, as invisible as it was powerful. She believed she'd taken everything from me tonight, but she had no idea I was 3 steps ahead. The clock above the stage read 6:47 p.m. The program was running late, as it always did at these galas. I could hear the faint clinking of forks against plates, the rustle of sequined fabric brushing against chairs, the low hum of conversations. But under all of that I could feel it, the unease. The room sensed something was wrong even if they couldn't name it yet. I watched as she floated across the floor, her smile perfectly rehearsed. She greeted people she barely knew with hugs too long, kisses too loud. My friends glanced at me, uncertain. They saw it too. They saw the theft, the mockery, the way she turned my night into her stage. One woman leaned over and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Oh, how awkward. They're wearing the same thing." Awkward. That was their word for it. They didn't know it wasn't coincidence. They didn't know this was her plan all along. He caught my eye. That smile of hers, sharp, smug, wasn't for the others. It was for me. A silent message. Look at me, sister. I've stolen the spotlight again. My chest tightened, but not from fear. From resolve. Because I realized in that moment she hadn't just worn my dress. She'd walked in wearing my life. She wanted my debut, my recognition, my applause. And she thought she could snatch it as easily as slipping into fabric. I set down my glass. My hand didn't tremble. If anything, it steadied. I knew what I had to do. The chairwoman tapped the microphone, clearing her throat. The sound jolted through the hall, cutting off the chatter. My stomach knotted, not from nerves but from anticipation. This was the moment. The unveiling. My sister thought she'd be standing beside me, basking in stolen glory. She thought the crowd would cheer for us both. But I had already spoken with the chairwoman earlier. I had explained, in my calm, measured voice, that this night was important to me, not because of vanity but because of what it represented. The years I had worked, the hours I had poured into building something from nothing. My name was on the program. Mine alone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the chairwoman said, her voice strong, echoing against the high ceilings. "Please welcome Dr. Marshall." Pause. Not the Marshalls. Not the sisters. Just me. I rose slowly, feeling her eyes burn into me as I walked past her. The hush in the room thickened, heavy and charged. My heels clicked against the polished floor, every step deliberate, like a drumbeat announcing war. But before I reached the stage I saw it, the quick flicker of her mask slipping. Her smile faltered just for a second. Her eyes narrowed, sharp as glass. She had not expected this. She had thought she would share my spotlight, maybe even steal it. Now she stood in silence, her matching gown suddenly a costume of desperation. I didn't stop walking. I didn't turn my head. But inside a fire lit. Because I knew then, this wasn't just about a dress. It was about years. Decades of her stealing little pieces of me. My ideas, my friends, even the way I laughed. She'd chipped away until she believed there was nothing left of me that wasn't hers. But tonight she'd made her mistake. Tonight she showed her hand too boldly. And tonight I had the advantage. Halfway up the steps I glanced back. Just once. Our eyes locked across the room. I saw the fury beneath her painted smile, the panic she tried to hide. "You planned this," she mouthed silently. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because she was right. And she had no idea how much further the plan went. Her lips formed the words but no sound came out. The orchestra of clapping drowned everything. The applause belonged to me. The silence clung to her like a second skin. I stepped onto the stage, the bright lights warming my face. My palms tingled, not with nerves but with something sharper. Vindication. Behind me I could almost hear her breathing quicken. She had dressed for my spotlight and now the spotlight burned her. I adjusted the microphone. The room hushed, expectant. Dozens of eyes fixed on me, waiting. My throat tightened, but not from fear. From awareness. Every word I spoke now was another nail in the coffin of her little performance. "Good evening," I said, my voice calm, steady. "I stand before you tonight grateful for this moment. Grateful for every hand that helped me rise, for every challenge that forced me to keep going." The words weren't dramatic. They didn't need to be. I let silence linger, then continued, "And I stand alone. Because this work, this recognition belongs to no one else." The applause rose again, swelling, filling the cavernous hall. I didn't look back at her. I didn't need to. I knew what she was doing. Standing rigid, smiling too tightly, caught between fury and humiliation. The lights dimmed slightly as I finished my remarks. I turned, stepping off the stage. The crowd leaned in, hands reaching for mine, their congratulations pouring over me like warm rain. But through the sea of faces I caught her eyes again. She was whispering. To the man beside her. To the woman behind her. The curve of her lips pretended kindness, but the flick of her eyes betrayed her. Even in defeat she was plotting. I moved through the room, shaking hands, feeling the squeeze of fingers, the warmth of smiles. People congratulated me, praised me, but my mind stayed sharp, watching her. I caught fragments of her words. Unfair. Should have been both. Always overshadowed. Her whispers were poison, dripping slowly, testing whether they could still corrode my moment. The woman beside me leaned close and murmured, "Your sister seems upset." I smiled thinly. She usually is. Dinner was served. Plates clattered, the smell of roasted chicken and herbs drifting through the hall. I sat at the center table, the honored guest, with the chairwoman on my right. My sister sat 3 chairs down, too far to insert herself but close enough to glare. I cut into the chicken slowly, the crisp skin crackling under my knife. My appetite was faint, but I ate with deliberate calm. She pushed her food around her plate, her fork scraping sharp against porcelain. At one point the man next to her asked, "So, did you two plan to match tonight?" She froze. For a heartbeat her mask slipped. Then she laughed too loudly. "Oh, pure coincidence," she said, her voice brittle. I dabbed my lips with my napkin and said softly, "Strange coincidence, considering no one else in this city carries that shade of blue." The table chuckled politely, the man nodded, conversation moved on. But I saw the heat rise in her cheeks, the way her jaw tightened. It was a small victory, but it tasted sweet. As the night unfolded, I realized something new. The more she tried to insert herself, the more invisible she became. Her laughter rang too forced, her comments too sharp. Guests turned their shoulders away from her, leaned closer to me. At one point she leaned across the table and said quietly, "You think you've won tonight." I kept my eyes on my glass of water, swirling it slowly. "I don't think. I know." Her smile faltered, but only for a second. She straightened, tilting her chin high. "Enjoy it while it lasts." That was her way. A threat hidden in elegance. A dagger slipped between pleasantries. Later, as the orchestra began a soft waltz, couples moved to the dance floor. I remained seated, content to watch. My knees had never forgiven me for my younger days of running after children, climbing stairs, carrying groceries up 3 flights. But I liked watching. The swirl of dresses, the flicker of joy on faces. It was enough. She, of course, made a spectacle. Dragging a partner onto the floor, spinning too fast, laughing too loudly. Her dress shimmered under the lights, the copy of mine, but instead of admiration she drew murmurs. People shook their heads. Too much. Too obvious. The chairwoman leaned toward me, her voice low. "She doesn't realize the room sees right through her." I nodded slightly, my lips curving. "She never does." But beneath my calm unease grew. Because I knew my sister. Humiliation wasn't an end for her, it was fuel. She thrived on resentment, feeding it until it became something dangerous. So as I sat there, applauded, congratulated, admired, I also waited. Waited for her next move. Because there would be one. There always was. I didn't have to wait long. Near the end of the evening, as guests began gathering coats, she approached me. The air between us thickened, heavy with unsaid things. She leaned close, her perfume sharp, cloying. "You think they love you now," she whispered, her voice low enough for only me. "But I'll make sure they see you differently soon." Her eyes gleamed, not with defeat but with promise. A promise of trouble. A promise of war. I met her gaze, unflinching. My voice steady. "Then I'll be ready." The applause had been mine. The silence had been hers. But the night was not over. And neither was she. That night after the gala, I lay awake in bed with the echoes of applause still humming faintly in my chest. But beneath the glow of victory, I felt the sharp edge of her words. She wasn't finished. She never was. The clock glowed 2:13 a.m. The house was quiet, yet I couldn't sleep. I thought of her face in the ballroom, her smile too tight, her whispers too quick. She had been humiliated, and humiliation was her favorite fuel. I knew better than to think she would simply lick her wounds and fade away. No, she would regroup. She always did. That was when I realized, patience had to be my weapon. I couldn't confront her head-on. She thrived on direct conflict, on turning every fight into a performance where she played the victim. No, my revenge would need to be quieter, slower. A poison she would never taste until it was too late. The next morning she called. Her voice sugary, too cheerful. "Wasn't it such a beautiful night?" she asked. "You looked so confident." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, choosing silence over agreement. She laughed lightly. "Oh, don't be cross with me. People will only remember how stunning we both looked." There was again the theft. Not just my dress but my moment twisted into ours. I said simply, "I remember it differently." And hung up. For a moment I felt guilty. Hanging up wasn't polite. But then I reminded myself, she'd been impolite all her life. Patience meant watching, listening. So I began to notice small things. At a community luncheon, she told people she had helped me prepare for the gala. At a church gathering, she joked that I had borrowed her style. Lies, casual and venomous. I didn't correct her. Not yet. Correcting her outright would only feed her. Instead, I smiled, nodded, and tucked every word away like evidence. Meanwhile, I made my moves quietly. The chairwoman invited me to coffee one morning. Over steaming cups, she said, "Your sister's been busy. Reaching out to a few donors, hinting that she should have shared the stage with you." I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the bitterness ground me. "That sounds like her," I said. The chairwoman studied me. "What do you want me to do?" I shook my head. "Nothing. Just watch." Patience also meant remembering. And I remembered years, decades, of her stealing. She had copied my hairstyles in high school, then claimed she had inspired me. She had mocked my cooking, then served my recipes at her own dinners. She had even flirted with a man I once cared for, only to dismiss him later as if he were never worth it. Each memory was another drop of poison I stored carefully. Not to wallow in pain but to remind myself that her pattern was consistent. And consistent patterns could be dismantled. One afternoon I attended a neighborhood book club. She showed up too, though she wasn't a member. She perched herself in the armchair, crossed her legs, and inserted her opinions loudly as if she had been invited. When someone asked me about the gala, she interrupted, "Oh, it was a joint affair really." I encouraged her to go. Without me, she never would have had the courage. The women in the room shifted uncomfortably. One of them glanced at me, waiting for me to snap back. But I didn't. I only smiled faintly and said, "It's funny how people remember things differently." That was all. Short, simple. But I saw it. The tiny flicker of doubt crossed their faces as they looked at her. They weren't convinced. They were confused. And confusion, I knew, was the seed of truth. Patience wasn't easy. Sometimes I wanted to scream. Sometimes I wanted to drag her lies into the light and expose them. But I forced myself to wait. Because I knew the longer I stayed calm, the more frantic she would become. And she did. At another dinner, she tried to toast me, but her words stumbled. She slurred slightly, maybe from too much wine, maybe from nerves. People exchanged looks. At a fundraiser, she introduced herself not as Margaret, but as Dr. Marshall's sister. The title she wanted for herself slipped further away each time she spoke it. I stayed silent. I smiled. I let her dig. The true poison of patience is that it doesn't look like revenge at all. To her it looked like passivity. She believed she was still winning. She thought my silence meant surrender. But inside I was charting every move, every lie, every stumble. I was building something stronger than anger. I was building inevitability. One night after a community event, she cornered me in the parking lot. The cool night air smelled faintly of rain. Streetlights cast long shadows across the asphalt. "You think you're so clever," she hissed, her voice low. "Standing there with your little smiles, letting people believe you're better than me." I folded my arms, leaning against my car. "I don't have to let them believe anything. They see for themselves." Her face twisted, anger breaking through the mask. "This isn't over." I looked at her calmly, letting silence stretch until she shifted uncomfortably. Then I said, "I know." At home I sat in the quiet again. My house smelled faintly of lavender from the candle I'd lit. The ticking of the clock was steady, patient, reminding me that time itself was on my side. I thought about her words. "This isn't over." And I almost smiled. Because she was right. It wasn't over. But what she didn't understand was that by rushing, by lashing out, by weaving more lies, she was poisoning herself. All I had to do was wait. And waiting was something I'd perfected. But waiting has its rewards. Slowly, almost too slowly to notice, her cracks began to show. And the world, our small community of neighbors, friends, and colleagues, began to see her the way I had always seen her. It started at a luncheon the following week. She had dressed in bright red, a color meant to command attention. But her voice, when she stood to share a story, wavered. She stumbled over names, misquoted details. I watched forks pause in midair, eyes flicker toward one another. It was subtle, but it was there. When she sat down, her cheeks flushed, she leaned over to me and whispered, "You think they're laughing at me?" I sipped my tea. "I don't think. I know." Her hand tightened around her napkin, twisting it into a rope. The spotlight was shifting. Not because I pulled it, but because she pushed it too far. Every move she made to claim attention only revealed her desperation. At a fundraising dinner, she made a speech uninvited. She rose abruptly, glass in hand, and began thanking people who weren't even in the room. Her laugh was too loud, her stories too long. I sat quietly, letting her words run on like a stream, losing itself in the dirt. By the time she finished, the applause was scattered, polite at best. The chairwoman caught my eye and raised a brow. That was all. A small gesture, but it was enough. The spotlight had burned her, not me. But humiliation alone wasn't enough. Not for her. She needed to fight back, and she did it the only way she knew, through whispers. At a grocery store I overheard her. She stood near the apples telling a woman, "My sister, she's good at pretending. Always was. Don't believe everything you see." The woman spotted me, startled, and quickly left the aisle. My sister smiled thinly, biting into an apple without paying for it first. "People believe me," she said through the crunch. I set down my basket and leaned close enough for only her to hear. "They used to. Not anymore." She swallowed hard. For the first time I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Still, she wasn't finished. One evening I hosted a small dinner at my home. Nothing grand, roast chicken, green beans, a pie cooling on the counter. She arrived late as always, carrying a bottle of cheap wine dressed in a fancy bag. Through the meal she dropped little barbs. "This recipe tastes familiar," she said, smirking. "Didn't I make something just like this last year?" My friends exchanged glances. One of them asked, "Really? Because this tastes just like the one you served us 10 years ago, Margaret. You called it your signature." Her smirk faltered. She raised her glass instead of answering. When the pie was served, she tried again. "Oh, apple pie. Plus, though mine usually has a flakier crust." I laughed softly. "Yes, yours usually crumbles." The table erupted in gentle chuckles. She smiled, but her eyes sharpened like blades. The more she tried, the worse it became. She whispered lies, I said nothing. She sought attention, I gave her silence. And silence, I realized, was more powerful than any argument. But inside me a storm brewed. Because while she flailed publicly, she still found ways to wound me privately. Late-night calls, messages filled with insults disguised as concern, questions about whether my friends truly liked me or only tolerated me. She knew where to poke, which scars to press. One night, after another bitter phone call, I sat in the dark living room, staring at the framed photographs on my wall. My children. My grandchildren. Their smiles warmed me but also reminded me of the stakes. She wasn't just trying to destroy me, she was trying to taint everything connected to me. I couldn't allow it. Then came the neighborhood gathering. A summer evening, string lights glowing above the patio, the scent of grilled meat in the air. She arrived in another bold dress, green this time, and immediately took center stage. He began telling a story, my story. About how I had struggled through medical school, how I had nearly quit. Except she twisted it. In her version, she was the one who pushed me through, the one who sacrificed for me. I froze, lemonade glass in hand, as people turned toward her, some nodding, some frowning. And if I thought, enough patience. When she finished, I stood. That's not quite how I remember it, I said, my voice calm. She turned, startled. Oh, and how do you remember it? I smiled faintly. I remember working 2 jobs while you borrowed money you never repaid. I remember sleepless nights, but not once did you study beside me. And I remember succeeding alone. The air shifted. Conversations stilled. She opened her mouth, then closed it, no words forming. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Finally, someone coughed, changed the subject, and the gathering moved on. But I saw her face, pale under the lights. The spotlight hadn't just burned her this time, it had scorched. That night she cornered me as I walked to my car. The crickets chirped, the air still warm. She grabbed my arm, her grip tight. You humiliated me, she hissed. I looked at her hand until she released it. No, I said. You humiliated yourself. Her breath quickened. You'll regret this. I met her eyes, steady. I already don't. At home, I sat by the window watching the moonlight spill across the floor. I thought of her words, you'll regret this. Maybe she believed it. Maybe she still thought she could claw her way back, twist the story again. But something had shifted. The room had heard me. They had seen her. The balance was changing. Still, I knew her well enough to understand. She wouldn't surrender quietly. And that meant my patience wasn't over yet. It had only just begun. The weeks that followed were like watching a curtain slowly draw back on a stage. Everyone began to see her as I had always seen her. Desperate, hollow, frantic. And I, sitting quietly in the audience, simply let the play unfold. But there was one thing left to do. Revenge isn't complete with humiliation alone. Revenge requires resolution. It came on an ordinary evening. The town council had invited me to speak about my work. Nothing glamorous, just a gathering in the library basement, rows of folding chairs, the faint smell of old books and floor polish. I wore a simple navy dress, not the infamous one, just something plain and comfortable. Of course she came. He always came. She slipped into the back row, lips painted too red, smile too wide. And before I could begin, she rose. Before my sister starts, she said loudly, I'd just like to say that none of this would have been possible without me. I've supported her, encouraged her, guided her. Murmurs spread through the room. I stood at the podium, hands resting lightly on the wood. My heart pounded, but not from fear. From readiness. Because this was the moment I had been waiting for. I stepped forward, my voice calm but carrying. That's interesting, I said. Because my memories are different. The room quieted. All eyes turned to me. I continued, steady and clear. I remember her laughing at me when I said I wanted to be a doctor. I remember her saying I wasn't smart enough, not tough enough. I remember her borrowing money I never saw again. And I remember standing on that stage at the gala, alone because I earned it. Gasps. Shifts in seats. People looked at her now, not with admiration but with questions. Doubt. Her smile faltered. She's exaggerating, she said quickly. You know how sisters are. I shook my head. No. I'm not exaggerating. I'm telling the truth. And I think it's time everyone heard it. For years I had let her steal. My stories. My friends. Even my silence. But now the silence was broken. I told them about the nights she mocked me for studying. About the lies she spread at family dinners. About the dress. The stolen dress. That had revealed everything. My words weren't dramatic. They were simple. Honest. And honesty has a weight lies can't carry. The more I spoke, the smaller she became. She shifted in her chair, her hands fidgeting, her eyes darting. When she finally stood, her voice cracked. She's making me sound like a villain, she cried. I only wanted to be part of her world. And there was the truth, not from me but from her own lips. The meeting ended in uneasy silence. People approached me with soft touches on the arm with words of support. No one approached her. Later in the parking lot she waited by my car. The air was cool, the lamplight harsh against her tired face. "You ruined me," she said, her voice trembling. I met her eyes. "No. You ruined yourself. I just stopped covering for you." Tears welled in her eyes but anger lit behind them. "I gave you everything." I shook my head slowly. "No, sister. You tried to take everything. But tonight I took it back." From that day things shifted. Invitations that once went to both of us went to me alone. Friends who once tolerated her stopped answering her calls. The small circle of attention she craved shrank until it was nothing. He tried, of course. She threw her own gatherings, but few came. She posted pictures online, but they drew more pity than praise. The spotlight she had always chased now burned her, leaving her exposed and empty. And I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Revenge isn't about shouting triumph. It's about balance. And the balance had finally been restored. One afternoon months later she showed up at my door. Her face was thinner, her makeup smudged, her hands trembling slightly. "I just wanted to talk," she said. I let her in. The house smelled of fresh bread, the warmth of my grandchildren's toys scattered across the rug. She sat on the edge of the couch, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "I don't know what happened," she whispered. "People don't call me anymore. They look at me like I'm nothing." I poured her a cup of tea, set it gently on the table. "You wanted their eyes," I said softly. "Now you have them. Only now they see you clearly." Her hands shook as she lifted the cup. "So this is your revenge." I met her gaze, steady. "No. This is my truth." Revenge was simply letting it be seen. She left soon after, shoulders hunched, the air around her heavy. I watched her walk down the path, smaller than I had ever seen her. And I realized something. I didn't need to hate her anymore. She had destroyed herself far better than I ever could. What I needed was peace. And peace at last was mine. Now when I sit with my friends, laughter echoing, or when I see my grandchildren's faces light up at the door, I feel the difference. No shadow looms over me. No whispers chase my name. I am myself again. He wanted my life. He wanted my light. He wanted my name. But in the end I took it all back. Not with cruelty. Not with shouting. With patience. With truth. And truth, I learned, is the sharpest revenge of all. The spotlight is mine now. And it no longer burns me. It warms. If this story touched your heart, hit subscribe, because more powerful stories of betrayal and revenge are waiting for you here.